I think it's important to have education in general. I think that's one of the tragedies of our era, is that the educational system in the United States is just so terrible. Actually, you can go to any other country, perhaps, and find a better education system. It is purposely being defunded, trashed, ruined, discredited, and it's very sad. But one of the the popular media that we have is one of the reasons people feel that that they don't even get their ability to try to fight and try to get a better education system, because they're constantly being fed such terrible, ridiculous kinds of news stories, and more than that, I think somebody said it's 17% the amount of time that it goes to advertising on most network primetime stories. So 17% of what people see when they turn on their television or their commercial radio is trying to sell them drugs to make life a little more tolerable, and try to ameliorate the results of a really terrible healthcare system. So it's hard to isolate media literacy when everything else is so tragically deteriorated. So I have a when I was a child, my mother had polio, and I was taken care of by a woman who was an African American in St. Louis, Missouri, and she wrote letters to. She was basically a healthcare worker, or definitely a kind of low-end employee. And she wrote the most exquisite, articulate, lovely letters to my mother every day to tell her what I was only 2 years old at the time. And it's the most amazing letters that I doubt that anyone from her community now would have the skills to write those letters. But at that time, there was funded public education, and it's astounding to read her letters. So I just have been looking through some old material, so I came across that, and it's quite astounding. In order to get a job at the places that do the mainstream main network television are very much under the control of the corporations that own those entities. So it's such a difference. I think one of the most important things I've done in my life is to try to ensure that there is an alternative, and actually through Deep Dish TV, building up a network of alternative TVs, we were able to initiate the transmission of Democracy Now!, which all you have to do is look at one episode of Democracy Now! And compare it on the same day to the news the corporate news, and it's such a difference. It's like there's no comparison, because there are real journalists who are dedicated to the kind of difficulty of funding and difficulty of keeping alive. Many of them put their lives on the line in the wars that we have started. Our country is funding, and they are able to actually tell the truth. So far, we'll see if things get so bad that somehow they'll figure out a way to close Democracy Now! Down. It's amazing, but unless people can really become more, I think that the one thing that is heartening about this terrible situation of the war in Gaza is that you can't really hide the images, and for the first time there are images of real human beings living in Gaza that are the victims of our taxes, get victims of the sorts of military industrial profiteering that is going on. It's really outrageous. It's like how if you see what's going on, you cannot deny that this is really a terrible situation, and it goes back to the things that President Eisenhower. I was born in 1940, so I remember President Eisenhower in the 50s, and he railed against the military-industrial complex. He was a Republican. You don't see Republicans like that anymore, and nor do you see people who are given the access that obviously a president would have to tell the truth about the way that our country is held really hostage to these big corporations and little corporations. I live in Woodstock, New York, and people think of Woodstock, oh, peace and love, and the festival, which was not held here. Actually, it was held 70 miles from here, but it was started here, so people assume that this is where the peace and love was. But peace, there's the biggest employer in our town, Woodstock, New York, is a military-industrial complex member called Amatec Rotron, which makes fans which are used in launching cluster bombs, which is an illegal product, and which is and I've the only access the public has is the letters to the editor column in the local paper. They will not do any investigative journalism to look for what the situation is with Amatec Rotron, how many orders they get from Israel, one of their biggest suppliers. There's 400 people in Woodstock working for Amatec Rotron, and you would never know that from looking at our newspaper. There's never any news of what kinds of things they're doing. So even at a very local level, the only access I have, which thank God, I do have the letters to the editor, which I occasionally write about, informing people about the situation here. I think that there is it's very important that people really know what their rights are. I just was reading about, there's a bill which is trying to wend its way through the New York State legislature, that when prisoners come out of prison, they will be finally, if this bill passes, they will be given an application to vote, and they will be able to they all the rules, etc., are set down in this packet that's going to be given to them if this bill passes. But for example, in New York, in the country, there is such a huge amount of people who have been arrested. And if you're arrested in a felony in many states, you cannot vote. So that's a very, as more and more people are feeding this prison industrial complex, we see that it's less and less. There's a whole segment of society that is not allowed to vote in many states. So we're trying to state that, but not just allowing it, but actually encouraging voters. And I thought that was a very hopeful bill that can get passed. But that you don't read about that in the papers. There's no real mention of that. I happened to come across this bill in a report from a very one of our representatives. So I'm glad that she was able to get that information out. But there's so you wouldn't. Where can you find that information? You turn on the TV and 17% of every hour is drug ads. So we'll talk about media literacy. How many people even think, oh my goodness, yeah, that's an awful lot of time that is spent selling us drugs. But in the meantime, what is happening to this country? It's very sad. And places like Project Censored, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, all those organizations are very, very important and should be supported, but hopefully to actually increase. I met you at the this conference that was the Union for Democratic Communications, and I must say I was heartened to see so many people and such lively conversations and the energy. It seems like there is a growing interest in critical media literacy, and it's about time.